Now, believe it or not, I know we're enjoying ourselves so much, but we have come to the last panel of the day. And this is all about the opportunities and risks in the new technology era. So our speakers are going to share their technology transformation journeys, including how to approach growth opportunities in early stage AI business. They'll also talk about the impact on traditional investment strategies and the role of human judgment during the transformation process. They may or may not use ChatGPT to answer these questions. We'll see. So we have a wonderful moderator for us today, Mr. CHEUNG Leong, Chief Strategy Officer of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. And our panelists today are Ken Hao, Chairman and Managing Partner at Silver Lake, Deven J. Parekh, Managing Director at Insight Partners, David Siegel, Co-Chairman and Co-Founder at 2 Sigma, and Hemant Taneja, CEO and Managing Director at General Catalyst. So please give them all a very warm welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for staying behind. This is the last panel, I understand, between us and Eddie and lunch. First thing first, we won't talk about real estate on this panel. First of all, let's welcome our 4 distinguished panelists to the stage. And then today we're going to talk about technology. So of course, when we think about technology these days, we think about AI, all these fancy words. But technology, in fact, has been transforming humanity for thousands of years. We talk about fire, or can talk about fire. I talk about steam engine and everything else in between. But of course, today, AI has been sort of the point of discussions for many people. And we have a great panel here. They all have first-hand experience in the technology and in the evolution and the trend of it. So perhaps I would start with Ken. Ken, you manage Silver Lake, large-scale private equity investor, buyout. So you have been through multiple, I guess, waves in technology investment. So can you tell us a little bit more to put things into context, and then sort of how different is this current AI wave is from all the others?
I'd be happy to. And Eddie will be glad to know he only needs to be thanked 4 more times. So thank you for the opportunity to present here for the first time. Well, I've been investing in tech for over 30 years, and I'm not going to start with the steam engine, but certainly over that trajectory, which I think most of you remember, when I started in the business, it was mainframes and PCs for home use, and that changed. We've seen these giant waves of innovation, starting with client-server, and then replaced by internet architectures, and then, of course, cloud computing and mobility in between, and these all built on top of each other. One architecture enabled another bigger trend. And I think for sure, the elephant in the room, both today and yesterday, was AI, and I think justifiably so. I mean, AI and cloud computing are closely coupled. And for sure, this is a tidal wave that I certainly have never seen in terms of scale, speed, and impact. And clearly, I'm not suggesting that all the money that's being thrown at AI is going to be well spent, far from. But it's a trend that we at Silver Lake think is powerful and sustainable, although it will be volatile. And so with respect to AI, I think you've got every single boardroom, every single management team, certainly I think every single investment committee thinking about whether AI is a headwind or a tailwind for any investment. I mean, that's front and center. And for us, shifting to private equity, we are a large-scale private equity firm. These days, especially given all the volatility, our strategy is to focus on a small number of very large-scale investments denominated in units of $1 billion out of a $20 billion fund. And so we are very careful about understanding risk and making sure we can protect our capital and also pursue the upside of the investment. And so I'd narrow our focus areas with respect to AI, in particular, into two areas. Number one is the gigantic tech infrastructure that we see being built. I mean, AI has the wonderful impact of being a gigantic upgrade cycle. I mean, I refer to it as the mother of all upgrade cycles, particularly in hardware and data centers. And so we have investments in two data center companies, one called Vantage, another one which is a UAE-specific company called G42, who are embarking on large-scale data center build-outs. And the key there, because a lot was talked about data center build-out yesterday as a private equity theme, I'd add on to that theme, it's going to be growing, but I do believe it's going to be volatile. And so our strategy is to, frankly, spend a ton of time with the most important hyperscalers who have, I think, the most professional approach, the most visibility on what they want to do. And so we spend, through Vantage and G42, a ton of time, particularly with Microsoft, understanding their roadmaps, frankly, getting fairly deep commitments and visibility on what they want to do and how our data center companies can add value in that regard. And there are other major data center customers, like the other hyperscalers, and certain other very specialized companies that we feel strongly about. The other arena that we spend a lot of time thinking about is enterprise software. Again, back to the phrase, mother of all upgrade cycles. Enterprise software companies who have a natural upgrade path to AI enabling their offerings and providing a lot of intelligence to their enterprise customers, we think is the path to the future. And increased growth rates, increased profitability, and all the goodness that comes from that, but also embedded in a company that's established and profitable, and even if it takes a little longer, still has an enduring returns profile that could be enhanced with AI. So those are the two areas that we focus on the most. It's not glamorous. We're not making some of the big early stage bets like perhaps some of my very talented colleagues here who focus on disruptive next generation companies. But we're trying to focus on companies that have a strong established baseline but can inflect to faster growth, better profitability with an AI tailwind.
So I guess very pragmatic kind of approach, focusing still in a way the very hardcore investment discipline, right? Looking at profitability, looking at how efficiency can be predictable in some sense. Now, if I may turn to Hemant, you're obviously in a more early stage. So like Ken said, you're very high risk. You're getting into areas probably people don't know what they don't know. So can you then share with us how you look at AI investment, how you manage some of these unforeseen risks?
Yeah, so I think about the whole AI movement as your input is the foundation models, right? So you've got all these models being created all over the world now, open source, some closed source, and your output is workforce transformation. That's the way we sort of think about what's happening with AI. And so the question is, what needs to happen in the middle so that the way we work in society can fundamentally change with these language models? So let's talk about everything that we need. First thing we need is, unless you assume that these baseline internet-based language models have all the understanding in the world, you have to build small models on top that are specific to the industries where you're doing the workforce transformation. So the understanding, and I'll come back to an example of all of this in a second, but what the role of AI is in industrial sector versus healthcare versus media, it's all different. And so you do need to sort of think about how do you specialize with closed-end data sets on the use of that AI, okay? So now you have the small models. Then you talk about, well, how do we adapt those into the enterprise so that there's workforce transformation? First thing is, you can't just take these models and put them on a data center and all of a sudden they start becoming functional. In fact, this is one of the reasons that all these companies that have gone and done proof of concepts with AI over the last couple of years, no one's really figured out how to adopt it at scale because they're stuck. Why are they stuck? They're stuck because you don't have the data infrastructure that can actually take these models and apply them and make them usable. So there's all this innovation that's happening today at the data infrastructure layer. So now you have the small models, you have the big models on top, you have data infrastructure, and then you have to try to imagine what is your workforce really going to look like. You're going to have these digital agents that are doing stuff, and then you have human beings. And somehow work's going to change when humans are going to do some things, and digital agents are going to do the other things. And so the choices you make there are very important, going back to responsibility. Choice is, should the digital agent be the pilot or the co-pilot? Okay, like what level of responsibility are you comfortable giving it in the context of the severity of the decisions that are being made? So, and now think about all these things I just talked about. You bring them into an enterprise, and you have to do all the change management on top. What does your organization look like? And how are you going to build, what does culture mean in that company? So it's a fair amount of work that needs to get done. So I'll give you an example of where we have been doing this. So when the whole GPT thing came out, we do a lot of work in healthcare. It's about 20% of our business. A lot of health systems called us and said, what should we do? And we said, well, if you give us access to your data, we will go build a language model that sits on top of these internet models, small model, that you guys can use that's safe and can be used for the industry. 40 health systems gave us their data. We built this company we started last February, so about 20 months ago. And we took that data, we trained a language model that was specific to healthcare that sits on top of the internet models. And we said, okay, now how do we use it? And we decided the first use case that we're going to give back to those health systems was a agentic nurse. Okay, so in the United States, a nurse costs $90 an hour on the phone. The one that's checking on how was your procedure yesterday, or are you prepared for your procedure that you're about to have tomorrow, checking up on your elderly, $90 on the phone. And one of their key KPIs is get off the phone as quickly as possible so you can make the next call. So they're always in a rush, they're not very empathetic, they're being measured for efficiency, not efficacy and empathy. So this model, when we turn it into an AI nurse, cost us, we don't charge this, but it costs us 9 cents an hour. And we give it back to those health systems at $9 an hour. So it's like software margins, right? But it's like a 10x cost reduction. So think about that. And this nurse never judges you, answers every question. If you're old and you're bored at home, he'll talk to you forever. You can talk to him about the news. It's the smartest nurse on the planet. Creates an amazing sort of trust and experience in that regard. And so that's being rolled out. And here the key decision, by the way, was, do you trust this agentic nurse enough to be the pilot or the co-pilot? So we started by deciding, is this a tool we're going to give to nurses to make them more efficient on the phone, or are we going to just build an AI nurse? Given we had all the data, we were able to train a safe AI nurse that now can make the calls. If something is really severe, it'll get escalated, just like it would escalate to your supervisor. But this nurse is out there making all kinds of phone calls, in 20 different health systems now. The last thing I would say is, when you think about what we just did, we went from a shortage of nurses in the United States to having an abundance of nurse capacity with this technology. So then you start thinking about, how would you change the healthcare model? Would you just call every one of your elderly patients every day to chit-chat with them so they're not feeling isolated, and also make sure they're compliant with their meds? Would you really think about care models differently? So I think the impact is actually quite profound, what you can do, but you have to think about all these pieces coming together to be able to drive that.
A very interesting story. I heard of another story, which I think happens maybe around a year ago. People did a survey in UK. So they have real doctors, and then they have AI doctors, and then they selected a bunch of patients. So they talk to the real doctor, talk to them through text, and then the AI doctor talk to them. So at the end, about a few months after, then these patients were asked this question. Oh, first of all, can you distinguish who's the real doctor, who's the AI doctor? In fact, most of them can distinguish. So the whole thing did not pass the Turing test. But the second question was quite interesting. Second question they asked is, the patient, do you prefer the real doctor or do you prefer the AI doctor? In fact, more than half of the patients say, I actually prefer the AI doctor. They're more sympathetic. They don't argue back. They don't debate with me. So a lot more sympathetic. But we'll come to that maybe later on in the conversation. But I think I want to get to the point, Hemant, you talk about how AI having an impact on specific industries. So David, if I can get to you, you obviously run a hedge fund. You already long time ago started to use big data models, analytic algorithm to already assist your investment decisions. So in your sense, how AI is having an impact on the investment business? Would AI be just co-pilot, or maybe one day, because it's all about pattern recognitions and etc. If you look at the gentlemen here, we did not talk about it before, but we're all in dark suits. And then the blue shirt guy always wear blue ties. The red shirt guy wear red ties. I'm obviously not
some
a
people wear no
person. So pattern recognition. So sorry, David.
Tech guys wear no ties.
Well, thank you very much. Very happy to be here. Well, let me begin by making a bit of a confession, which is, I have actually a PhD from the AI lab at MIT back in 1991. So I've been thinking about AI, most of my life. And today, you might wonder why I'll say to you that I'm very confused by the field. Because number one, when people use the word AI, they're referring to, it's such a generic term at this point that you don't really know what it's specifically about. And for example, I'll make two broad categories. There are forms of AI that are used to make predictions. There are also other forms of AI, which people call generative AI, like the large language models. And the sort of AI that went into the protein folding stuff, AlphaFold, is very different from the kind of AI that might be used to, at the company that you were describing. And so I think that the audience should just reflect for a moment. When you hear the word AI, it's an extremely generic term these days, and you really have to ask more questions about what exactly is the technology that you're talking about. The reason I start with this is because at Two Sigma, for example, for 25 years now, we have been using data and pretty much every algorithm we can think of to make investment decisions. And we never really thought so much about, is this an AI algorithm? Is this not an AI algorithm? We just use the best algorithms we can find to make predictions. We use the best algorithms we can find to optimize portfolios and to handle pretty much every aspect of the business. So when I look at AI today, maybe the conclusion I'll come to is that mostly it's a wake-up call to people that computers and data and algorithms are more powerful than people thought. And now everyone is rushing to figure out how they can use them effectively in their business. And I think that's very legitimate. So I see all of this, I'm going to call it, it's a hype cycle. I see it in a positive way because it is causing people to think very carefully about new ways to go about utilizing data and computers. And now, unfortunately, and here's where it gets a bit tricky, there is a lot of hype. A lot of what people say about AI may not really be true. There's a combination of underestimation of certain capabilities, overestimation of other capabilities. Fundamentally, this is occurring because it's actually really complicated and technical. This is not like regression. These are very, very complicated computer systems that you have to have a fairly deep understanding to get a realistic expectation about will it be able to solve the problem that you have. And I'll give just one example of where to be cautious. In the domain of predictive AI, for example, using it to predict the weather or using it to predict the price of an equity. Okay, that kind of makes sense because weather is predictable. It appears that the price of equities are predictable. But there are many examples of people attempting, in my opinion, to use AI to make predictions of things that may not be predictable. And so it doesn't even matter what the technology that you're using, you'll never be able to make that prediction. I don't want to go into examples now, it'll take too much time, but this is not a solution to everything. The AI that we have today is going to make people a lot of money. It's going to solve a lot of problems, but it's really not going to turn our society, it won't solve all of the problems of our society, far from it.
So no Skynet in your view, not yet.
Nowhere near.
Nowhere near. Okay, great.
Well, if I might add, I get asked a lot, and I think on this very important point of AI being a very catch-all phrase, I get asked a lot about, is there going to be a return on AI that's going to be adequate for all the money that's been spending? My answer is yes, with an asterisk, because every board, every manager is reallocating money towards AI. It's their most strategic imperative, or top two. And it's so murky that you can justify a lot. And because it's so existential and fundamental, you can ascribe all your cost cutting to AI. You can ascribe your revenue generation as better than if we had not done it, and competing on that basis. And I think that's the wonderful wheel that technology is on to get people to spend more.
Right. So Deven, I think this is the best time for you to come in as well. So Insight Partner is a growth stage kind of investor. You always have to balance, I guess, growth, profitability, and everything else. So in the case of AI investment or development, first I think Ken also asked the question, but also how do you balance between sort of innovation and potentially responsible kind of investment, not infringing consumers or other people's rights? Because I think David also mentioned this thing is very complex. Not everyone really understands it.
Yeah, so first, we are at an investment conference. So what I want to start with is a concept, which is that you can be incredibly bullish about a technology and not necessarily feel like the investment climate to invest in that technology at the time might be correct. And so we have the view right now that valuations are extremely overextended in AI. And if you look actually right now, and I was talking about this earlier with Hemant, I mean, the easiest way, there's only been one company that's made money on AI so far, and that's NVIDIA. Everything else is on paper, right? And if you go back to, I'll use an analogy of the internet, back in 1999, you had the whole universe of companies, eToys and Pets.com, and there's a list of 50 of those companies, and there's predictions about the size of the internet. The interesting thing is the size of the internet ended up being way bigger. None of those companies succeeded. But 15 years later, you have a whole universe of companies that didn't exist in 1999 that are actually trillion-dollar market caps today. So the point, and I'm going to answer your question, the point is, this is either a long-term market or it's not. And I think everybody on this panel would believe it's a long-term market. And so if that's the case, you don't have to make the bet today in order to still make very significant returns. The way, and now I'll go to kind of the way Insight thinks about the market. And we really kind of break the market up into, and this is our own definition, kind of 5 categories. One I'll call like the infrastructure layer that sits under the LLMs. So that's companies like Weights and Biases and Hugging Face. Then you have the LLMs themselves, and OpenAI being the most prominent example, but there's obviously lots of others. And then you get to the applications, and we break up the applications into 3 categories. The first is, we like to call it making the impossible possible, and I'll come back to that. The second is kind of AI native applications that are built for some vertical, kind of like what Hemant was talking about. And the third, and this is kind of bridging a little bit of what Ken was talking about, is incumbents AI enabling their businesses, right? If you go to our view across those categories, the challenge of the infrastructure layer is it's likely when we get to LLMs that market's going to consolidate. So the number of customers that you're going to have as an infrastructure provider to that market is pretty limited. And that's the biggest challenge in that market. When you go to the LLMs, which we're not investors in, so far that does not look smart to not be an investor. But the reality is what we see is a significant risk of commoditization. And right now you've got one company that's got significant scale and revenue, and every week you can see the new update about the new model and the impact the new model has, and now Anthropic is a little bit ahead of OpenAI, and OpenAI is a little bit ahead of, so how all that plays out in an economic model in a very, very capital-intensive industry is really unclear. Third, the kind of making the impossible possible example in our portfolio is a company called Profluent, which is also focuses on this protein folding area. That's just something you couldn't do before. And so in our view, the things that you literally couldn't do before do have a little bit more of a moat than something which is an existing workflow that exists, which kind of takes me to the second category of companies, which is there are tons of AI native applications being built across lots of different markets. We probably see, we're doing this analysis recently, we saw at least 20 companies last year that this year you would not invest in just because of OpenAI's new model has gotten closer to their capability, right? And so you really have to find something where you actually have a true, not just software moat, but a data moat or a customer moat, which is why the thing Ken talked about earlier I think is super important, which is, and I'll use an example in our portfolio, we have a company called Central Reach, which is the leading provider of software to autism clinics. And autism as a condition is fast growing more because it's diagnosed. It was underdiagnosed, it's now diagnosed more appropriately. So what they've done is basically launched an AI function on top of their existing product. But what do they have? They have the leading market share of all the autism clinics already. They have the patient data for a significant portion of the. Now, if you were a new startup and said, I'm going to create this AI autism software model, that's great, but you don't have a single customer, you don't have data. And so you're seeing in a lot of markets people launching a company, but they have no customers. Now, the challenge is the incumbents are not always innovative. And so one of the things that, hopefully firms like ours do is work with our portfolio companies to make sure that they actually innovate on these categories. But having this moat, whether that be a data moat, a healthcare data moat, or some of the type of moats I've talked about, is critical. And I can tell you there's hundreds of companies that we've looked at that have no moat. And I think that there's going to be, you're definitely going to see a lot of write-offs in this category over the next 2 to 3 years. And I didn't hit the responsibility points. I just want to get to that quickly. I think when you think about, and unfortunately responsibility can be defined lots of different ways, so I'll just pick two. Kind of explainability, I'll pick that as the first one. And I'll use an example in our portfolio of a company called Zest AI that does credit underwriting for banks, right? The reality is when you think about credit underwriting, a loan officer has significantly higher risk of bias than a computer. They look at your picture, they look at your name, they have all kinds of inherent biases from just those two things before you even get to the credit file, okay? A computer, as long as you can explain why it's making the decision, is actually less likely to have bias. And so Zest AI has actually gotten a lot of push from even regulators who kind of want banks to use this type of software because they can explain why they rejected Ken's mortgage on his $500 million house in Hong Kong. I'm joking. So if you explainability, I think is really, really important in these AI applications, particularly when we're making a decision around some sort of human decision. I'll use privacy as another example. We have a company called Intensi that focuses on worker safety and that uses visual technology to kind of monitor work areas, construction sites. It only triggers when there's actually a problem. Now, if you think about the current system, there's a video trained on the worker the entire day, and it's being taped and monitored. As a worker, what would you prefer? Somebody monitoring you all the time, or only monitoring you when there's actually an event? And so I think that responsibility, most of the time, responsibility comes up in the context of technology. I mean, self-driving cars is a great example of if somebody gets hit by a car, with an autonomous vehicle, it's a huge deal, and it's on the cover of the New York Times for weeks. But 40,000 people a year die in car accidents, 70% of them because of human error. That gets no focus. So I think we have to be mindful of the fact that while responsibility is important, you also have to balance it against what is the positive impact that technology can make from a decisioning standpoint.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I think there's a very deep thinking also beyond finance and technology, right? It is about sort of technology, how it interacts with humanity and all that. But even before we get there, I think there's a question in a lot of us, our mind, is that as an investor, Ken mentioned, you don't look at AI and you just jump in, right? It takes different forms and shapes, and et cetera. But would you give sort of one advice to the people in the room here? What is the biggest risk when they make or when they considered investment into AI? What should they think about?
Investing in a company, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understand
Investing into companies. Yeah. So who wants to start?
I think, look, the thing about AI is it has large systemic effects. So we have a series of companies, going back to the healthcare example. Some of them are creating more efficiency and eliminating jobs. Some of them are creating tools that allow us to create new jobs in the system. And any individual company might be in the business of eliminating jobs or creating jobs. So I think as an investor, when you're investing in a sector, you have to sort of think about it systemically and be intentional about what is the world going to look like 20, 30 years from now. And if everything that we're investing in our core thesis plays out, is this a system on the other side that's inclusive? Health systems are the largest employers in every city in America, right? And if we put all the nurses on the phone, replace them with agents, and physicians become a lot more efficient, and all the payment stuff is done by AI, which is possible, and we said that's all we did, we would have actually created an unemployment problem in those cities. But in those same cities, we don't have enough people that take care of our elderly or our kids with mental health, so there's like missing workforces. So are you also creating those workforces? Because I think in the end, the systems and the companies in those systems that get to compound for a long time are the ones that are in the fundamental interest of society. So you do need to think about what are these ecosystems that are going to develop using AI in each of these industries, and are those sustainable, inclusive, or not?
And from the other end of the spectrum on, I think your question was, what's your advice for people wanting to invest in AI? I would say, first of all, be very careful in trying it at home. It's not easy, and as I think one of the other panelists mentioned earlier, it's already gotten to the point where the valuations are so full that, frankly, if you're not invested in AI or large-scale AI today, it might be prudent to wait, as was discussed earlier. I think the easiest way to invest in AI is to ride on the back of the top 4 or 5 hyperscaler companies that, or NVIDIA, they all have a lot of runway. And I think the best vehicles to monetize, and it's mission critical for them. And by the way, they're spending massive amounts of money, but they can easily afford it. And then on the startup side, I think you got to go with professionals who, don't just invest in one AI company. You got to have a portfolio, and maybe a really wide portfolio run by professional investors like some of these gentlemen and some others who have lived and breathed it for some number of years.
I would add that I think probably in the end, most of the money that will be made on AI capabilities are going to be made not by AI companies, but by companies like Amazon and many incumbents and more of the traditional businesses, because ultimately this technology will allow them to operate more efficiently. It will make certain kinds of businesses more scalable. And so in my mind, AI is mostly an infrastructure capability that will be turbocharging other kinds of activities. And I think that ultimately that's where the opportunities are.
And I guess, and I'll tailor my question more towards application companies than kind of infrastructure, but I would just ask a really simple question. What is your competitive advantage in a non-AI world? If they can't answer that question, it's a problem.
All right, thank you. I have a question for David. You have a family foundation, as I understand, which says we're focused on understanding and shaping the impact of technology on society. So tell us, what do you mean by that? And in a way, how do we think about technology and society?
Thank you, I do. That mission statement is something that I adopted maybe 12 years ago, long before all of the AI topics that we're talking about here. My thought back then, and I think I basically was right about this, is that our society is becoming more and more technologically sophisticated. And so, putting aside AI, technology is advancing in general at a pretty rapid pace. It's a bit of an exponential effect, and the compounding is leading to increasing and rapid change. And I think the real reason people are confused right now is that the overall level of technical sophistication in our society is pretty low. And so if we're expecting the world to continue to benefit from and advance with AI and other new technologies, we have to make sure that people have a greater level of sophistication on how to use these technologies. And it can't just be limited to a small group of people. If it's limited to a small group of people, we're probably not going to get the outcomes that we want for a lot of different reasons. So the mission of the foundation, and I think this is a big challenge in every country of the world, is how do we prepare people for more rapid technical-driven change? And I'll just give one example. 30 years ago, when you went to school and you got a job, you pretty much had the expectation that your career and your skills would probably be good for a lifetime. And today, maybe they're good for a handful of years. And so the world is not really set up for rapid change, even in, for example, education.
Right, that's great. So I guess that I think it also summarizes quite well, part of what we want to talk about is that, while it's very exciting to see how technology investment in AI can help, a few shareholders get rich in the shortest possible time, but we also want to extend the question beyond and ask the question, how does it bring, better and better life and more sustainable kind of benefits to the overall society as well. So with that, let's give a big hand to our panel.